Hello and welcome to Ditching Hourly. I'm Jonathan Stark. Today I'm joined by guest Joel Clermont. Joel, welcome to the show.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Great to have you here. The premise of this interview sort of kicked off in the Ditcherville Slack, where you
hmm
had mentioned that you'd listened to a Business of Authority episode where we talked about over delivering, and you were like,
Yes.
"Oof, flashbacks to my agency days."
Yeah.
So we wanted to talk about that, and then you sort of transition from agency to solo, and then a subsequent transition from hourly to value. So this should be a jam-packed episode.
Yep.
But first, could you tell folks a little bit about who you are and what you do now?
Yeah. These days, I primarily focus on Laravel development and specifically helping teams that are building Laravel SaaS-based products to kind of level up their product and their team. And so that covers a lot of different things, but that's my current focus.
Great. All right, cool. Okay, so let's just jump right in with the agency to solo and the
hmm
over delivering piece. That's probably a
Okay.
good place to start.
Yeah. So I recall some comment on the show because the title I think had the word over delivering in it. And I'll be honest, like before listening to that, I kind of considered over delivering to be a positive, right?
Hmm.
Like we do even more than you ask us for.
Hmm.
But as I was listening to the episode and how you were framing it, I realized like in the context you were describing, it actually isn't necessarily a good thing. It can be a negative thing. And it made me reflect back when I had an agency. I had two partners, and we would do, I would say, a lot of smaller projects, whereas now I'm kind of focused on fewer big projects. Um, and I just like it resonated. This idea of over delivering would come up in client meetings where they would ask for something where we even knew this really is not useful. It's probably detrimental to the project, but you want it and you're paying us hourly. So I guess we'll do it.
Right.
We'd push back even once or twice. And at a certain point, it'd just be like, okay, we're going to do it. And the friction I felt at that just all surfaced again, because this is going back now, over 10 years when it was in that model.
Mhm.
So it just really resonated like, oh, it's so much better now. Looking, looking back on those days and not having to deal with that anymore.
Totally. And it was such a big thing that you named your solo consultancy to remind yourself.
Right.
So,
Yeah. So, and just to be clear, I love my partners. In fact, just kind of a side story, the first partner, the way we met, we both were bidding on the same job.
hmm,
And his focus was more in like what he termed a brochure website, your simple 5-page site. And I was more focused on like database driven sites. And the client came back and said, you know what, I actually need both. Could you guys work together? And we really hit it off. And so, I worked with him for over 10 years. It was a wonderful relationship. But at a certain point, I just felt this conflict. And, like I'll give you an example. So we would be in a client meeting, and they'd mentioned they were there to talk about, his 5-page website that he always liked to build for people.
hmm.
He'd rather do 2 to 3 projects a week. I'd rather do 2 to 3 projects a year. So there's a little bit of mismatch there. But they just offhand mentioned some sort of like internal business process. And like, I'd want to dig into that. And I would, light bulbs would go off like, hey, we could actually help you with that. And I'd always get shut down.
Mm,
Well, that's not what they want, or they don't have the budget for that, or let's just do this first and we'll come back to that, which we never did.
yeah.
So those were sorts of the things where I reached a certain point where I just, I wasn't happy. It wasn't horrible. I could have done it until I retired, but I just, I wanted to go back on my own and kind of do things my way. That's where the tongue-in-cheek name, No Compromises, came from,
Mm,
because it was, compromises in terms of just how to run a business, but also within a project. Probably my first hint at why I didn't like hourly billing is I'd get pushback within the team. We can't do that. That'll take too long. Or it's like, no, the client won't want to pay for that. And I'm like, well, that doesn't matter because we need to do this. This is important to the success of the project. But so anyways, like all of that was kind of encapsulated in the name No Compromises. Not that I'm stubborn and difficult to work with, but there were certain things like I just felt there was an ethical stance. Like I have to do it this way to be proud of my work.
all right. First, do no harm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So what was I don't know if it's relevant, but the process of going solo, is that pretty much just a tough conversation and then you um, just started, or was that how did you
Yeah.
start?
Well, so there were two difficult conversations to be had. One was with my partners. The other was with my wife.
Hmm.
Because it was a successful business. We had a crew of people working there, designers and developers, a steady stream of leads. More work than we could handle, and so it was a good thing. But um, I had also kind of built up a cushion, and I didn't need to be working. I was feeling maybe a little bit of burnout too.
Hmm.
So yeah, so the conversation internally, I didn't just like up and quit one day. It was about a year long transition period, and even beyond that, they would reach out to me. Clients and projects I had the lead on before. I would still work with them, so I didn't leave them high and dry.
Right.
On the family side, there was a little uncertainty. Thankfully, the way we had things structured for like health insurance and all that wasn't dependent on the agency. I was actually still paying for that myself.
Hmm.
um, but anyways, yeah, that there was a little bit of risk involved. In fact, I took probably a solid 6 months off completely, just to kind of like recharge. I went to a bunch of conferences. I even explored different technologies, and I just I kind of wanted to figure out what I wanted to do. But yeah, it was a little bit of a leap of faith, and thankfully it turned out okay.
Cool. I'm glad I asked. That's very interesting. Okay, and then just out of curiosity, were you doing Laravel at the agency, or was that something that you
Mm-mm.
had been playing with and you went to a conference and you loved the community, or what was going on there? How'd you pick Laravel?
Yeah, just to put this in context, that first project I did with my partner, where the client made us work together, was 1997, right? So this is going back
Whoa.
quite a ways. Yeah, it wasn't even PHP. I was
Pearl.
doing what we call, yeah, Perl, and Microsoft's ASP, which is now
Oh
called
yeah.
Classic ASP. Um, but yeah, Laravel came later. In fact, I think I didn't start doing Laravel myself until maybe 2014. So that's only been about 8 years. Well, Laravel itself was only 10 years old, right?
Right.
So,
So.
but yeah, when I went out, when I formed No Compromises, I was doing PHP. At the time, my framework of choice was called Zen Framework.
Oh yeah.
There were others that I used, but yeah, Laravel came later. And but I went to a Ruby conference, and I even dabbled in Rails for a couple of years. I did some projects. I went to some mobile development conferences, and I had some fun doing that. Ultimately, abandoned it, but yeah, it was a period of exploration, kind of figuring out the intersection of like what I'm good at, what things are in demand, and where I can find customers that are willing to hire me.
Right. Right. Okay. Perfect. Yeah. A lot of people struggle with that. It's like I can do lots of things.
Sure.
What do you? So there's a. It feels like there's. It's worth asking. You seem like the technologies themselves are pretty fungible. You're like, I could probably code with,
Hmm.
iOS, like whatever, Objective-C or Swift
Yeah.
or any variety of web scripting, whatever, Cake, PHP or
Hmm.
CodeIgniter
Yeah.
or Zen. You're
Sure.
like, I could do any of these. Like,
Yeah.
um, but what would you say your core skill is though? Is it, you
Mm.
just feel like, because it's not Laravel, obviously, if you're just like, well, it's just the one I picked because it was in demand or whatever.
Yeah.
What would you say your core skill is?
If you had asked me that in 2012, when I went out on my own again, I probably would have said PHP.
Hmm.
But in hindsight, and I've heard this from people I've worked with, I think the skill that I have is having having technical chops, but also being able to speak to the business,
Hmm.
and being able to not jump right to, oh, here's what we need to build, but to take a step back and kind of figure out, why are we doing this and what needs to be solved. And so, like, even back when I was doing hourly billing, wasn't even really thinking in terms of business value as like a way of pricing a project. I did have like a mindset of like, well, I want this to be useful. And I know if I build something that works, but nobody uses it, I won't get repeat business from them. But if I build something that works and like helps them, they're going to come back. And I just saw that time and time again. So I think I'd really focus on that as like, the key skill to my success is sort of the insights into the business to dig into that and not just kind of stay at the tech layer.
Yeah, I cannot overemphasize how important that is. I used to say the exact same thing. Like there are way better developers than me. Like there was no point in my career when I was like the best developer at anything, but I was pretty good at
Mm-hmm.
not jumping to conclusions and really trying to understand why the client was making the request they were instead of just them saying, "Oh, we need a Facebook clone." Okay,
Sure. Right.
right?
Yeah.
And that is critical. Anybody listening to this that doesn't think that's a big deal, like really marinate on that one because it's super important. And we're not there yet, but it's the key to value pricing
Mm-hmm.
because you need to think about the business benefits. You need to think more like a business owner than as a pair of hands that are taking orders. But anyway,
Yeah.
not to cut
Yeah.
yeah, not to cut too far ahead, but for folks who do already think like in this more diagnostic, consultative, upfront way before jumping into the code editor, that's like the perfect precondition to start thinking about value pricing
Yeah.
if that's on your radar. Anyway, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's period of exploration and
Mm-hmm.
then what happened?
Yeah. So then I guess the way I describe it is I sort of got sucked back into consulting, like, because I even thought about, well, maybe I should build a product. Maybe I should do this. Maybe I should do that. Maybe I should just like go work for some big tech company and level up my skills. And so all of these things were in the mix, but I really did enjoy working one-on-one with clients. I found I enjoyed it way more as a solo practitioner than like a guy running a team of people,
Hmm.
running an agency and doing HR stuff and all the things that I really never enjoyed doing or set out to do. So I slowly started ramping back up the projects I was working on, the clients, and like the reason I describe it as kind of being sucked back into it. I wasn't actively seeking clients,
Mm.
but you build up this network of people, and they hear you're available, and so I'd get referrals, and hey, can you just help us with this? Or I'd been working with different clients for 10+ years at that point. And so that kind of deep network just just pulled me back in.
Mm.
Now at the time, I was still doing hourly billing because even though I saw there was some conflict, I knew hourly billing wasn't great because you'd have these mismatches of expectation of total cost, or things would take longer, or there's nitpicking over like, well, why did you do that? Like I knew it wasn't great, but we had tried fixed bid pricing,
Hmm.
and that, in our opinion at the time, that was even worse, right? Because
Hmm.
we didn't not being focused on an outcome, we still sort of operated in that do what you're told mindset, but now we had a cap as to what we were
Yeah,
getting paid, and so I like, oh, I don't want to do that either. So
that's a great point. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, if you like not having the why conversation gives you no way to control scope creep. So like
Yeah.
you
Right.
can't identify when there's a distraction, like a one of these
Mm-hmm.
torpedo requests, one
Yep.
of these requests that's just weird and it's going to torpedo the project or jeopardize the likelihood of reaching the stated goal because you don't have the stated goal. So
Right. Right.
so yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up. That's something I should probably talk about more. But yeah, the beauty of having a sort of outcome-based price is that you had to find the outcome in the first place,
Mm-hmm.
and you can detect when a request is going to diverge from the path. So then you have a basis to say no. It's not because, oh, you only paid us X and we're not going to do this because it wasn't part of the scope that we laid out at the beginning. It's this real like
Right.
combative kind of
Yeah.
relationship. Yeah.
Right. It's so adversarial, whereas the other way of framing it is like, hey, we both want the same thing. Let's do that thing that we agreed on is the outcome we want. So
And yeah, and good clients are like, oh, you're right, you're right, you're right, you're right. You're right. We always
mm-hmm,
do this.
mm-hmm,
We got shiny object syndrome. Thank you for keeping us on
right.
track because this is much
Yeah.
more important. Yeah,
Yeah.
great.
So
So what you
like
got sucked back like into what kind of a
mhm.
thing? Was it just sort of like maintenance stuff, or was it we need a new
um
feature, or
yeah, it was a mix. It was projects I had worked on before that needed a new feature or needed some maintenance. It was, clients I'd worked with before that had some new initiative, so it was more of a greenfield project, but they liked working with me before.
Mhm.
And I mean, the split of the agency when I left, it was amicable, and the nice thing was there was a clear subset of clients that were more my target client that had the complex, data driven web app instead of the brochure website.
Mhm.
And so it was really kind of easy like they would get the call, just send this to Joel. He'll do this. We don't want to do it. And so
Right.
that is how a lot of the business kind of followed me, even when I left on my own.
Mm. Yeah, something similar with me when I left the firm I was at. There were a couple of clients that literally no one else was ever working with. It was just me. And I
Yeah.
was mostly managing people, but I had two or three clients where I was like the lead and only developer. And I just worked at it, same thing,
Hmm.
amicable split. We just worked out a profit sharing thing and off to the races. So it was a
Yeah.
great transition. Cool. I mean, that's a great position to be in. They were getting enough leads. They weren't desperate for the work. So
No.
they probably didn't, it was outside of their skill set. So they're like, I'll just give it to Joel so everybody's happy. All right. So how long what was and then did that get a little bit, at some point, did that get a little bit less reactive? Meaning,
Um,
like stuff just coming in, you're doing it, or did you get more specific, like get more picky about who you did work with, or was like, everything's fine. I'm charging X per hour. I like these people. I've worked with them
yeah.
before.
No, there was probably several years of that where literally did no marketing. I didn't even have in my mind like who is the ideal person for me to work with. It really was just, jobs would land in my inbox and be like, hey, that sounds like fun. I'll do
Yeah.
that. Um, and so I actually went back through my email because I'm like, when is the first email I got from you? Because that kind of was the turning point to like rethink the idea of hourly billing, and then even thinking more about like who is my ideal person I want to work with, and how to seek them out. So it was August 1st, 2016, and
Wow.
I think it was the 5-page proposal template I downloaded from your website.
Wow.
And then I think the daily email I signed up for in September. So maybe like a month later, I got on that. But yeah, that for me, that was a turning point because it raised all sorts of questions that I wasn't like actively thinking about, but they connected with concerns I had on previous projects, like where I knew something wasn't quite right, but I didn't know what the alternative was, because the only alternative I knew, fixed bid pricing,
Hmm.
that didn't work either. In fact, I thought it was worse. So it
Right.
was kind of nice to sort of, as you spoon fed these ideas, I would try them out. And it slowly clicked, and, it's still a process, right? I'm still figuring things out, but I think it was I would say by about a year later, sometime in 2017, like a third of the projects was doing were fixed bid. They were
Mm.
not hourly. And then I pulled up my fresh books just to kind of, I have a bad memory on dates. So I'm like, when did this happen? It was a year after that, like early 2018. It was up to about 3/4 of all the invoices I was sending were fixed bid, 25% down payment, this, that, not
Mhm.
8.5 hours of work this week.
Right.
So it was kind of interesting to see that shift over time. And my very last client I was billing hourly, I finally said goodbye to them this year. It was
Wow.
February, for a
Wow.
variety of reasons. But so yeah, that the transition is fully complete now.
So that took 4 years in total, but it was,
Yeah.
steady progress. And
Yeah,
what
I'd
did you,
say it happened really quickly, like the first year and a half. But then there were some clients that were just like, they're such good clients, it was hard to let them go, and they just resisted the any transition away from what they were used to.
yeah,
So I,
it's, it's hard. I always call
mhm,
it trying to get out of the friend zone. It's really hard.
yeah.
So, well, you're a perfect person to ask this question. Did you ever, when you sat down to work on a project for client A,
Hmm.
and it was fixed bid, value-based fixed bid, and then you'd sit down to work for client B at, X dollars per hour, did you
Yeah.
notice a difference in your attitude or the way it felt?
Um, I think so. I'm trying to put myself back in a mindset from a few years ago,
Mm.
but the first thing that jumped to my mind when you asked that question is I felt more relaxed and less hurried when I was working on the fixed bid price, because I respect the client's budget, and so I always felt an awareness of, well, I don't want to take more time on this than this is necessary because it's going to cost them this money.
Hmm.
And so yeah, I would look forward to kind of taking my time and enjoying the project on a fixed bid, whereas the hourly is like get in and out as quick as you can.
That is funny because the I have other people who have the exact same experience, but for the same reason. Sorry, the exact opposite experience, but for the same reason.
Hmm.
Where the first time they do, and maybe this happened back in the agency days, or maybe it didn't happen. Maybe I'm just putting words in your mouth, but a lot of times the when people are billing by the hour, if they're not as empathetic to the client situation, they work for an hour and they think, I just made $200 or
Right.
whatever their rate is. And as soon as they do their first fixed bid, however it's priced, they work an hour and they think, I just lost $200.
Mm-hmm.
But you flip it because you're more worried about the client, and you don't want the client to you don't want that thing that you know will happen down the road when it goes over budget, where everybody starts to get a little finicky and picky and concerned, and it can get heated in in bad situations. And so
Yeah.
you have this, but because your focus was more on the client, you're like, oh, I want to rush through this because they're losing $200
Yeah.
at an hourly, so you don't feel like that fun thing where you go back and you refactor a chunk of code like a couple
Sure. Yeah.
times and you're just like, oh yeah, that's sweet. It's like, is it fair to charge the client for that, like that like hour when you're in the
Mm-hmm.
zone, kind of like blow drying your hair essentially? It's like so technically
Yeah.
got blah blah blah, but yeah, okay, that's interesting. I think the most important piece is that it feels different emotionally one way or the
Mm-hmm.
other when you're not on the clock. You're not, the meter is not running.
Yeah.
It's a totally different feeling.
And I mean, one other thing that I'll say, and maybe this is bad business advice, but I made the conscious decision on the fixed bid projects to not track my time. The way I looked at it is I have a roof over my head. I'm paying my bills. Like, even if technically I'm losing money versus my hourly rate, like I don't really care. Right. So I was trying to force a shift in my mindset. And so I knew if I tracked time, the one potential benefit is I could realize, oh, I really underbid this, or I could feel really good about myself. Like, whoa, I actually came out ahead on this, but I just decided I didn't want to do that. Number one, I hated tracking time. So getting rid of that was good, but I just made a conscious decision. Like, it didn't matter. I was going to be okay. I'd have a sense at the end of the project, whether it took longer or less time than I expected. And I could use that just like gut feel to adjust things, but I didn't measure the time. So that's part of why I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm losing, when I exited hourly, my highest rate was 125. But that same feeling, I didn't look at it that way because I was purposely not thinking about it in terms of hours at that point.
Mm. I think that's good advice. It's debated. I actually had a really fun, cool, fast system for tracking my time when I left the firm, and I continued to do it out of habit, and then very quickly it became comical. I was like, why am I even doing that? This is like
Right.
this is nothing.
Yeah.
So, some value prices are a hard line. If you are keeping a timesheet, you don't get it yet. Like, you still are
Hmm.
thinking wrong. And I don't think it's that black and white, because you have like employee things. There's a whole bunch of things where I don't think it's that black and white.
Yeah.
There's a question of like, I don't think it's important for the reasons that a lot of people want to keep doing it, but I do think there are benefits for some people who are maybe using it as a compass to find out where they need to maybe improve their skills, or are like, wow, I really spun my wheels on this. It's kind of like looking back over your expenses for the month and being
Hmm.
like, holy mackerel, I spent $1,000 at Starbucks. I didn't even
Yeah.
realize, right? So
Yeah.
I think there's potentially some value there. The problem is, like you said, if it's bogging you down in this mindset of hourly cost, if it's keeping you anchored in the cost-based pricing instead of value-based pricing, that's problematic.
Hmm.
So anyway, so I think that's good advice, but I'm also not going to argue with people who do want to keep tracking their time for productivity reasons, not for
Yeah.
pricing reasons.
Yeah. I can see both sides of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so where are we in the journey here?
Well,
Yeah.
there's kind of a key part that I should also mention. In so I was making the transition away from hourly kind of 2017, 2018, late 2018, I think it was October. I started working, calling my partner, even though legally on paper we're not partners. But Aaron, yeah, we do the podcast together. We ran the PHP meetup group in Milwaukee for 10 plus years together, and he was going out on his own. And so we started working on projects together. And I think that was probably another turning point for me because he and I have very different personalities. I'm more of a people pleaser, and he likes to style himself as kind of like the grumpy person who says no.
Good cutback, huh?
It's exactly. And so just having another person to talk things over, like when a lead came across, my email or I saw something on Twitter, we'd be like, hey, is this worth pursuing? And then once we got into the nitty gritty of writing a proposal, after having a client meeting or two, it just was a nice way of like a check and balance because my default position for so many years as a solo person was to say yes, because like, well, yeah, like I don't know when the next thing might come across my desk. So yeah, let's do this one. And now it's almost, I don't want to say the default is no, but the default is I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And Aaron is a huge help and continues to be in kind of helping me to not just jump at things and to really reflect. And does this align with what we want to do? Like even things like, do we really have time to do this? Because that's another developer trait I see is over estimation of what you can get done in a week and how
Oh
many
yeah.
different things you can juggle. So yeah, that really also helped with this transition away from hourly and then on to the really thinking about it in terms of value versus just, price.
Hmm. Okay, and for most people, the why conversation, being able to uncover some kind of value to the client, that sort of diagnostic meeting, is it's a bit of a performance art. It's
Mm-hmm.
maybe more art than science. Definitely more art than science. Maybe there's no science at all. How has your experience been with that? Like, do these calls take forever? Do you need to do like
Mm,
multiple calls, or do you kind of
yeah.
find yourself getting better at it, and you can sort of you got a nose, start to get a nose for like, oh, that smells like value, you know?
Yeah. One thing, this isn't maybe a direct answer, but one thing I've observed and that I've learned through trying to do the why conversation is it is almost a litmus test for whether this client is going to be a good fit.
Totally,
Um,
yes. Hmm.
and I saw it most starkly with like my existing clients, when they'd come back and now we're going to do like our sixth project together. And I would start to prod at those questions. I'm trying to practice this with existing clients. The ones that resisted that ended up being the ones I was the happiest to get rid of.
Hmm.
And the ones that really leaned into it were the greatest projects to work on
Yeah.
and the greatest clients to work with.
Yep. About a year or two ago, I modified my language around the why conversation to say, like, when you do that pivot away from they're done with their brain dump and then you pivot into the
Mm-hmm.
why conversation. I now say good clients will love this. Bad clients
Yeah.
might not. Bad clients will get defensive. Why do you need to know that? They feel like you're asking, just fix my toilet. You don't need to know why I need my toilet fixed.
Right.
It's they just want to tell you what to do, and they feel like you're either wasting their time or trying to pick their pocket, but
Yeah.
really, if you like a bad doctor would go, oh, triple bypass, sure, hang on, let me get my knife. A good doctor would say, well, hold your horses. Maybe you just need an antacid. Maybe you don't need a triple bypass. So where does it hurt? How long has it been like this? What would it be like to get back to normal? Those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So it really, I think it's important when someone is trying to start having the why conversation to realize that it is not some trick that you're trying to do to get more money out of the client. Sometimes you find there's very little value there, and your
Sure.
prices need to be low.
Yeah.
So it's not a Jedi mind trick to try and get giant project fees. It's to make sure that you deliver 100% customer satisfaction by reaching their goal at a budget that is worth it to them.
Hmm.
So, right. So you need to find out what the fundamental underlying goal is. Take a ballpark of what that might be worth to a client like this in the situation that they're in, and why they would hire someone expensive like you to help them with such a transformation.
Yeah.
And once you have that, then you can say, all right, so I can come up with three prices that are a fraction of what this is probably worth. So what could I do for those three prices? And you do the scope last, which is complete mind flip from like, oh, how many screens? Okay, 10 screens. All
Yeah.
right.
Uh,
How many fields on each screen? Okay, ooh, 45 fields. Oh, that's going to cost you.
yeah.
Okay, any business logic? Oh, field validation. Oh, let me write that down. That'll be like 45 minutes for each field val. So
I still find myself slipping back into that mindset.
It's hard.
I think
It's hard
that's the
not to.
hardest thing to shake.
Me too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But in terms of the why conversation, the two questions that I found the most interesting, like the question, why do this right now? That would really, because sometimes they would have no answer, right? Like, well, I don't know. And so like that gives me a really quick read on the importance of the project,
Yeah.
because sometimes it's a vanity thing, like, well, competitor has this thing and we want to have it too. And other times it's, well, we need this for a product launch at this trade show that we're going to in November. And like, to me, knowing those two things really helps me figure out like what is it that we can even do to reach this goal. So that was a great question. The one that was a little scary for me is why me?
Yeah.
Because I even asked, oh, why are you calling me? Especially when it's somebody I've never worked with before.
Yeah.
But it was interesting to find out why, because sometimes it would be like, well, so and so said you were great to work with, and so we figured it was worth a shot. That's okay, right? But other times I learned like, oh, we've listened to the last 30 episodes of your podcast, and we realized, hey, why don't we just hire these guys? And that just puts the whole conversation on a different footing. You feel less of a need to prove yourself, because they've kind of already decided they like you and like the way you work and talk about things. So that was really eye-opening for me kind of through that process.
Right. Yeah. It's an important one. And it is the one that I most often hear people skip. Like, well, yeah, I'll say, I'm trying to help them with a proposal, and the situation appraisal is missing that info. And I'll be like, well, what did they say when you asked them why hire someone expensive like you? And they're, oh, yeah, I didn't ask that. I'm like, well, then, we have nothing we can put in the proposal to remind them why they can't shop this around. So, you know what I mean? It's important because if you can't find an answer to that question, I almost wouldn't do a proposal. If they're, if they were like, well, we're talking to like 6 different people, so we just need to get prices from people, and then we'll decide who we want to go with. And you were one of the names that is in the hat. I'd be like, yeah, thanks anyway. Or I'd say, or sometimes I'll be like, maybe I'll want to do the proposal for some other reason, like it would be a marquee logo to have my website or something, or whatever the reason. I might say, well, I can tell you right now, I'm going to be double the price of anybody else, and I just start to set the anchor really high. And I'll say, but probably no one else who gives you a proposal will stand by their price. I'll be the only one that will stand by the price, but it's going to be higher because I'm the one that's actually being realistic, and everybody else is going to lowball you to get the job.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if for some reason I wanted to go there in a meeting, I would do it like that. But usually if I know that they're just shopping around, I wouldn't even bother.
Yeah. But yeah, the boss says I have to get 3 proposals, so you're just number 3.
See ya. Yeah.
It's not real exciting.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, cool. Okay. So where do we go from there? We're sort of hopping around. So
I guess kind of the next mindset shift I had, and one I'm still transitioning through, is the kind of switching from a tech focused mindset. Like I'm looking for people that want Laravel, to a value focused mindset of like I want to find people that have a pain point that I can solve. This just came up again yesterday on Twitter. A friend of mine was sort of complaining, very skilled guy, tons of experience, and he's like, well, no one wants to pay me for what I want to do. And I just said, well, you got to, maybe they do and they just don't know that. You have to frame it differently. Like, instead of talking about your specific tech skill X, like talk about a problem you can solve with that somebody might have. And then he replied, and he was kind of joking, well, that's too hard. But that it just, I see that over and over. And I even find myself falling into that trap. But that's the thing I'm still going through now. And part of that even has to do with like, what kind of person can I help? And I mentioned Laravel SaaS teams. That is a focus, and we're getting some nice projects in that space. But honestly, still, I would say most of the revenue is not in that audience. It's really more the non-technical business owner that has a successful product that's very tech centric, but they don't have the skills, and they've bounced between agencies and solo developers, and they kind of have a mess. And like, we're really good at cutting through that, fixing it, and kind of getting them back on track. And so, but I don't know what that demographic is. It's
Yeah.
hard to frame that. But I'm not overly worried about it. But that focus is refreshing, I think, for the right client, to come in and ask more about them and not get into the tech gobbledygook, as some of those people
Right.
will say. But then again, just to kind of shift here a little bit, like the Laravel SaaS team, like they are very tech focused. Like, hey, we have a problem with scaling XYZ, or with our team proficiency at this particular framework package. So it is kind of interesting to see both sides of that. And I
Mhm.
enjoy both of them, but we're still kind of straddling both of those worlds right now.
Right. Yeah, it takes a while to get the new positioning down and like have the leads shift over or whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
the non-technical founder who's bounced around between, a variety of different vendors, agencies and, Upwork and
Mm-hmm.
that group, they're pretty hard to find because
Yeah.
they don't have that label on their LinkedIn
No.
profile,
No.
but they are extremely profitable because you also mentioned they have sort of like a successful
Yeah.
business that's tech focused, but they aren't tech focused. So like the non-technical founder of some kind of platform, sorry, some kind of business that has, in your case, Laravel, is, yeah. And if you've got good
Mm-hmm.
bedside manner and understand
Mm-hmm.
business, then it's like you're like the goose that laid the golden egg for them.
Well,
It's like a dream.
the bar is set so low.
Right.
A lot of developers are just so flighty. Like this one guy we just started working with maybe a year and a half ago. He loved his developer, but he's like, he only responds to me, like every month or two, and he'll show up and he'll like have fixed a bunch of stuff, and then he goes off and I don't know where he goes for like a month or two. And like he really liked the guy, he just didn't like how he communicated.
Yeah.
And then we come along and we have weekly check-ins, and we would always push back and say, no, you can't do that this week, it's not going to happen.
Hmm.
But it's just such a different experience. like I like you mentioned, you don't have to be the best at the technical thing. Just having some basic business and communication skills gets you a
Yeah.
long way
Yeah.
in this business.
Yeah. Right. It's almost like, yeah, that story that you just told turned a light bulb on for me because I've heard that same thing a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
They don't always like the developer, but the developer is flaky. So you could almost like do like a social media campaign. It's like, hey, is anybody sick of like their flaky Laravel developer? And they would know, like they know the
Yeah.
answer to that question. They don't know the
Yeah.
answer to like, does anybody need their application re-architected or like
Right.
migrated to
No.
AWS? Like they don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
Do you feel like your agency is blowing smoke up your butt,
Mm-hmm.
or unresponsive, or that they're nickel and diming you? Like those sorts of questions they can answer easily. And your differentiator in that world would be like, hey, we're never going to talk down to you. We always pick up the phone. You're going to be weekly check-ins, come hell or high water, so on and so forth. And that's like, to a non-technical founder who can't tell if you're good or not until it's too late,
Right.
those signals of just being professional are huge, like for their comfort level.
Yeah. One of the things we lead with too, is we always joke we want to make it easy to fire us, because that's another thing is
That's a good one.
developers almost not intentionally, but they almost hold a client hostage. Like they bought the domain, or it's in their AWS account, or
Mm,
nothing is documented. So somebody, even if they wanted to fire them, they have no idea how to bring the next person in, because they don't know anything about their project. And so
mhm.
we spend a lot of time up front on, even in the proposal, here's some prerequisites. On our website we have resources for how to set up all the things we need, and you invite us to that, and we also have, here's how to remove us from that. And
Yeah.
just kind of framing it that way, I think has earned a lot of confidence from people, because they felt the pain when developers don't do that. They've
Yeah.
felt trapped. And we're making it obvious, like, no, we're never going to trap you. We want to make it easy to fire you too. I don't say that, but it is the
Yeah.
flip side is it's a lot easier to walk away from a bad client when you can just hand them everything that they already own. But
Hmm.
yeah, that's another huge benefit we try to
Yeah.
communicate early in the process.
That's really good. That's a good one. That happens even with employees where someone just like some lead dev has all of
Hmm.
the keys to the kingdom.
Yeah.
Um, cool. Okay. So what's next? So you've got plenty of leads. You're
Hmm.
getting more focused down in your sweet spot. You're still getting a solid pipeline of leads, sort of the old school type of leads. Um, and, do you feel like, and you've already mentioned that your quality of life is superior to what it was at the
Hmm.
agency.
Yeah.
So, do you feel like, it's, that's the main benefit so far, or do you feel like you're actually having better years, like income wise year over year? Or is it,
Yeah. Yeah. I think the pivot on that was probably 2016, actually, where I started shifting away from hourly. In fact, there was the first big flat fee project, basically would pay my bills for 6, 7 months.
mm-hmm.
And like that was a huge game changer because number one, it was such a big project that was time sensitive. Um, I had to say no and like turn away some other work. And so like the first thing to go was, I did subcontracting for other agencies, right? They would
Oh,
have overflow work and they knew I would get things done. I just had to turn all of that off. The people that only call when there's an emergency and their hair is on fire, I had to, gracefully end the relationship with them, but it kind of gave me the breathing room to kind of think about the business and not just like the day-to-day practice of, writing code.
mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was a huge shift, and the revenue continues to grow. I guess in terms of like what's next, obviously want to get better at attracting the right clients. But the other thing too is I'd like to. We've experimented with some products. Wrote a book. I'm experimenting with some productized services, and I kind of see that as sort of the next evolution to, instead of doing 2 or 3 big projects a year, maybe only doing one, and then having some revenue from a book or a course or some low touch services that I offer to people. And so that's where my energy is kind of focused right now for this upcoming year.
Cool. What would you say if you had to guess the percentage of your week you spend doing client work and the percentage of doing things like product development or ideation or marketing or podcasting? I guess that's
Mm-hmm.
marketing, but what's just roughly the breakdown?
It's probably about one day out of the week, and sometimes that day is spread across a few different days. But we record the podcast on Mondays, and Fridays are, like, we kind of call it product day, where I'll work on a blog post. Or right now I'm experimenting with a YouTube channel, and so I'm just kind of trying my hand at video editing and seeing how I like that. But yeah, I would say probably one full day of effort across the week, which I know is not enough. I'm trying to increase that.
That's better than most people. Cool. And so like 4 days of client work.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. And so with the productized services, it's probably too soon to say, but do you
Yeah.
imagine at some point that you would farm that work out to contractors or hire sort of junior
No.
people to execute? So it's still,
No.
yeah, so very
Yeah.
still anti-employee, anti.
That was part of the no compromises. Like we have turned down projects that are simply too big for 2 people. And
Hmm.
not too big because we couldn't do it, but we couldn't do it within the time frame that it needed.
Hmm.
We'll just turn them down
Yeah.
because I've been down that road. I, I'm trying to think of how to articulate this without offending people, but I honestly think for the vast majority of clients, working with like one or two professional solo practitioners is always better than working with an agency where you're going to have a different team member in your code base every other week. Like
Mm.
there's exceptions to that, but I've yet to see an agency really handle that well. And I've inherited a lot of agency built apps, but it's just, there's like a different attention to detail and care, and just cohesion that I see having like one or two. And they have to be good people. You can't be the flighty solo dev because that's a
Right.
different risk. But yeah, so that's kind of why I just don't want. I don't even think I could build an agency that would do that successfully. I personally feel it has to be just one or two professionals working on it.
Mm. So that reminds me of like three different stories. One is the guy who built the stone wall in front of our house. It was
Okay.
like a 65-year-old guy humping these 60-pound rocks around
Mm.
and complaining about his back the whole time. And I was like, I mean, have you thought about getting like a helper?
Hmm.
And he goes, I tried that. kids these days, they don't listen, they don't show up, they don't,
Yeah,
and I was like, yeah, well, they could unload the truck for you, couldn't they? I mean,
sure.
but he was just like, no way. Like it would, I almost said by accident, compromise the product in his mind, so I would say that I absolutely know that there are plenty of situations where I worked with one guy who had like 200 devs under it. It
Okay.
can work for certain kinds of things. A
Yeah.
lot of times it's real enterprisey because they want to
Right.
work
Right.
that way. They want to feel
Yeah.
like there's a deep bench. It's not really the buyer's money on the line. It's more like their job or their reputation is on the line, and so they want to have a lot of. They want to have a. They don't want to have all of their eggs in one basket,
Sure.
like
Yeah.
with just one or two people.
Hmm.
So I get that, and also
Hmm.
there's probably a little bit of selection bias because you'll inherit those kinds of projects
That's true.
naturally.
Yep. Yeah.
So, but yeah, I do think I think the bigger point is that adding headcount of the cheaper the better junior developers is the only way to scale an hourly business. Like if the
Yeah.
business model is hourly, the only way to scale it is to add more hands, add more hours to your inventory. And those hours need to be cheaper
Hmm.
than what you want to build them out at. So they're
Yeah.
naturally not going to be as good as you, or
Yeah.
at least they're wildly undervaluing themselves, in which case there's a sort of separate ethical question there, I suppose. Like they're great, but they don't realize that they're worth anything. So
Hmm.
so to me, like, so I meet, so there's selection bias. I meet a lot of people who have a bunch of employees that they don't really want because they don't want to be a boss. They don't consider themselves to be a good leader. They hate one-on-ones. They hate job posts. They hate interviewing people. Like maybe
Yeah.
hate's too strong a word, but it's not what they came to do. They came
No.
to write code, or they came to do
Hmm.
design, or the fun part. But they couldn't, but they hit a ceiling income wise around 200, 250 grand, and they're just like, I can't work anymore. I'm working like a dog. My lifestyle is expanding faster than my income, and I can't, I'm getting older, and I can't work more. I can't
Yeah.
raise my rate. Everybody will leave. So they start hiring people instead because they see it as the only way out. And,
Yeah.
and really, it's just they start running on the hourly hamster wheel, or like Rochelle calls it, the gilded hamster wheel, just running
Yep.
faster with more rats. So
It also makes it harder to say no to projects because now you have to keep a team of people
payroll,
busy.
yeah,
Yeah. So
right,
whereas me, it's like if I went a whole month without working, whatever, but if I had employees, I couldn't do that, right? And so that's I think that's another big part of why I just don't want to get back into that trap.
yeah,
And even with contractors, like I would just feel a responsibility if I'm giving this contractor a steady stream of work and just like I turn it off one day, I wouldn't feel great about that. So
right,
it's a lot less mental overhead too.
yeah. I mean, even if you were, let's say you had like 10 employees and you were just doing seven-figure projects
Hmm.
3 times a year. I mean, you're doing like $5 million a year, $10 million a year, and you could afford to have 10 people sitting on the bench for a month while that's terrible for their morale. Like,
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
even if you could afford to do it and you didn't care about paying, a couple months of payroll with no income generated
Hmm.
from it, they'll get nervous. They'll be looking for the exits.
Hmm.
I don't care how many meetings you have with all hands meetings saying like, no, don't worry, we're fine. I've got like 2 years of payroll in the bank. Just sit there.
Yeah. No,
You guys, everybody play video games. It
it'd be
doesn't
fun the
work.
first week, but after that, you're right, people would get antsy.
Yeah, yeah. So it is so it makes, like, exactly like you said, it makes it harder to say no when work comes in because like, well, at least they'll
Hmm.
have something to do,
Yeah.
to pass the time.
Hmm.
They get bored, they start trying learning new technologies, and they're like want to go work at Google or whatever. Yeah. Okay. So all right. Well, what's next for you guys? Just like more iteration on marketing toward the target market,
Yeah.
and
Our
productized
real
services.
focus, yeah, our real focus right now is I'll plug our website that we're using is masteringlaravel.io. And it's kind of like where we have our books and where you can sign up for the newsletter, and our podcast is there. But I'm working on a relaunch of that site that's really kind of focusing on the mission, which is to take a Laravel developer that's competent and make them feel confident, right? Like to go from yeah, I'm good at what I do, to feeling like I really know what I'm doing. I've mastered this. Like,
Mm,
because there's a lot of people, myself included, at times where you're like, I know how to do this, but am I any good, or what am I missing? And so that's kind of what our focus is on education. Most of it free, but some paid books and courses, and other offerings that'll show up there in the days ahead.
cool. Yes, I encourage people to go over there. Masteringlaravel.io.
Correct. Yep.
This has been great, Joel. Thanks so much for sharing your experience, and I think people are getting a lot out of it.
Good.
All right, folks, that's it for this week. I'm Jonathan Stark, and I hope you join me again next time for Ditching Hourly. Bye.